In the quiet corners of ordinary homes, beneath the floorboards, hidden in walls or tucked away in chests, lie fragments of a past that whisper secrets of devotion. These are not grand monuments or monumental temples, but simple scrolls, worn, faded, yet brimming with the intimate rhythm of everyday worship. What can these humble remnants teach us about the lives of those who carried faith not in public display, but in the private cadence of their daily existence? Some scholars suggest that the discovery of these scrolls, scattered across homes in ancient Judea and surrounding regions, reveals a sacred practice embedded in the ordinary, a devotion that did not rely on pomp, but on persistence, habit, and a quiet, unwavering love for God. Imagine a house in a small village near the hills of Jerusalem centuries ago. The family within is not wealthy. They are not priests or scribes. Yet within their modest home, on a shelf or behind a simple curtain, scrolls rest, carefully preserved, sometimes patched, sometimes rewritten, carrying prayers, blessings, or scriptures. These scrolls were not for show. They were touchstones, daily companions in the rhythm of life. They tell us that worship was not confined to the temple. It was woven into meals, into the morning light spilling across the floor, into the evening silence when children slept and the hearth glowed. Some of these scrolls bear familiar words, passages that later appear in the Hebrew scriptures, yet their form suggests personal adaptation. A parent might underline a line, add a margin note, or copy a verse to emphasize its relevance to their household. Others contain prayers not preserved elsewhere, pleas for protection from illness, guidance for children, or thanksgiving for a bountiful harvest. Each mark, each smudge, is a trace of devotion, evidence that faith was lived in the smallest acts, lighting a lamp, preparing bread, teaching a child. Archaeologists have long marveled at the consistency across sites, from urban homes in Judea to rural dwellings near the Dead Sea. The pattern is clear. Private devotion was not only common, it was essential. Scrolls placed under pillows, rolled in clay jars, or hidden behind stones suggest an awareness of danger, perhaps persecution, yet also a determination that sacred words would survive, that prayer would continue despite fear. Some scholars suggest this speaks to the resilience of faith, a devotion that cannot be extinguished by walls or rulers, a flame kept alive in the hearth and heart. What these artifacts reveal is more than religious practice. They illuminate the intimate relationship between ordinary people and the divine. They show us that worship was not a spectacle to be witnessed, but a conversation with God, often silent, often unseen, yet profoundly persistent. It was in the act of daily repetition, morning blessings, mealtime prayers, nighttime laments, that faith was sustained and strengthened. Consider the physicality of these scrolls. The parchment, sometimes goat or sheepskin, bears the fingerprints of those who touched it. Ink faded to brown, sometimes smudged from hurried hands or the damp of a stormy season. These imperfections are not flaws. They are testimonies. Each crease, each tear, each repaired corner speaks of lives intertwined with Scripture, of families shaping their own spiritual rhythm around these words. A child's small fingers might have traced the letters, learning devotion as one learns to walk, step by step, day by day. Even the locations of the scrolls within homes tell a story. Some were placed near the entrance, perhaps a silent prayer for those who came and went. Others lay near the hearth, a reminder that the fire sustaining the family also mirrored the fire of devotion within their hearts. Scholars suggest that these placements were intentional, reflecting an understanding that the sacred and the mundane were not separate but entwined, that every corner of life could be consecrated if approached with reverence. Yet, these scrolls also confront us with a question. What does it mean to practice faith in private without audience or applause? In an age where devotion can feel performative, these artifacts challenge us to consider the power of unseen, consistent worship. They remind us that the heart of faith often beats in silence, in repetition, in the quiet choices that define our character more than our public displays. What value do we place on our daily rituals, on the moments when no one watches, when only God witnesses? As we peer into these ancient homes through the lens of archaeology, we encounter a mirror. The past and present converse in the dust and ink of these scrolls, inviting us to reflect on our own habits of devotion. Are we mindful of the sacred in the ordinary? Do we, like those who preserved these scrolls, weave prayer into the fabric of our daily lives, into meals, work, and family routines? Or do we reserve it for moments of crisis, forgetting that consistent, ordinary worship holds transformative power? And here, in the midst of this reflection, a discovery lingers on the edge of revelation. Some scrolls hint at a hidden network of shared faith, letters or copied passages passed between homes, a quiet communication of belief that bound communities together. What stories might these fragments tell if we could hear the voices of those who read them, spoke them aloud in whispers, or held them close during nights of fear or longing? It is a question that draws us deeper into the mystery. The ordinary lives of the devout, preserved in fragments, speak louder than any grand monument ever could. If this glimpse into the hidden devotion of ancient families stirs something within you, consider leaving a word below. Your reflection becomes part of this ongoing conversation between past and present. The story does not end here. In fact, it is only beginning. And the next fragment awaits to reveal how these intimate practices shaped a world, a faith, and perhaps even the way we live our own spiritual lives today. The story of these scrolls deepens when we step beyond a single household and see a tapestry of devotion stretching across time and geography. From the hill villages of Judea to the bustling streets of ancient Jerusalem, these private collections were more than isolated curiosities. They were threads in a broader pattern of everyday worship that scholars are only beginning to understand. Each scroll, each faded line of ink, offers insight not merely into words spoken or written, but into lives structured around the sacred. Some historians suggest that these artifacts reveal a remarkable truth, that faith was not confined to temples or public rituals, but lived in the rhythm of ordinary existence, quietly, persistently, and with deliberate intention. Take, for example, a modest home unearthed near the outskirts of the Dead Sea. Beneath a loose stone floor, a clay jar contained fragments of parchment, rolled with care, some patched with additional strips of leather. Among them were copies of psalms, small prayers for protection, and even notes indicating family prayers to be recited at morning and evening. One verse, repeated in several fragments, reads almost like a mantra: "May the Lord guard this house and its dwellers from sunrise to nightfall." It is not grandiose theology, it is intimate, tender, and profoundly human. It speaks to a household conscious of life's fragility and determined to anchor itself in God's presence. These scrolls were more than static texts. They were lived tools. Scholars examining handwriting styles have noted that some fragments bear the marks of multiple authors. Parents teaching children to copy scripture, older siblings correcting younger ones, a careful hand preserving words for future generations. Even slight differences in ink color suggest ongoing revisions, additions, and adaptations. Faith was not static. It was dynamic, evolving, yet rooted in continuity. Each household created its own sacred rhythm, echoing practices observed elsewhere, but personalized to the demands of life. The materials themselves reveal much about daily devotion. The choice of parchment, the method of ink preparation, and even the way the scrolls were stored all point to deliberate care. In some homes, scrolls were hidden in hollowed spaces within walls or beneath floor tiles, as if to protect them from thieves, fire, or invaders. Some scholars propose that these precautions hint at periods of social unrest or religious tension, yet they also underscore an unshakable determination to preserve faith amid uncertainty. Worship in this context becomes both an act of devotion and a defiant claim of hope. Beyond individual households, these scrolls suggest a communal thread, a network of shared spirituality. Passages copied from one home to another, letters of encouragement tucked alongside prayers, even instructions for particular blessings, point to an interconnectedness rarely captured in monumental history. Ordinary people, separated by miles and sometimes by peril, were linked through words, through the intimate act of writing, sharing, and reciting scripture. The faith they preserved was not isolated, it was alive, a quiet conversation across time and space. The content of these scrolls also illuminates practical aspects of daily worship. Many contained guidance for meals, blessings over bread, or invocations for protection during travel or labor. Some included prayers for the sick, instructions for ritual cleanliness, or meditations on patience and resilience. These fragments demonstrate that worship was woven seamlessly into daily routines. Spiritual practice was not an interruption of life. It was life, infused with meaning at every ordinary juncture. This is a pattern that resonates with modern readers, reminding us that spirituality thrives not only in grand gestures, but in the deliberate rhythm of everyday acts. Consider the psychological impact on families. Children growing up with these scrolls witnessed devotion as a lived example. They saw parents pause, reflect, and speak to God in the midst of routine chores. They learned that faith was practical, tangible, and reliable, a force that could be counted on when storms came, when crops failed, or when threats loomed. Some scholars argue that this daily, intimate exposure to worship shaped generations, instilling resilience and moral grounding that transcended the written word itself. These households were, in essence, miniature centers of spiritual formation, producing a culture of enduring faith. Interestingly, some scrolls reveal subtle innovations. In a few fragments, prayers are adapted to the rhythms of the household. Verses that traditionally concluded a temple ritual are repurposed for bedtime, morning, or mealtime reflection. This indicates a sophisticated understanding of faith's elasticity. Scripture could be both sacred and practical, both eternal and intimately relevant. Worship, therefore, was not confined to a place or time. It was embedded in the continuum of life, shaping the ordinary into a vessel of the sacred. Yet these scrolls also carry hints of tension. Marks of hurried writing, crossed-out words, or corrections suggest anxiety. The human struggle to balance devotion with the demands of everyday survival. They remind us that faith in private was not effortless. It required discipline, mindfulness, and sometimes courage. Worship was a daily act of commitment, a persistent reaching toward God in a world often indifferent or hostile. These small fragments capture the emotional and spiritual texture of life: fear, hope, gratitude, and persistence, all coexisting within a simple household setting. And so, the ancient scrolls discovered in these homes become more than artifacts. They are windows into the lived faith of ordinary people. They challenge modern assumptions that religion must be grand, public, or performative. Instead, they celebrate quiet perseverance, intimate reflection, and the sacred woven seamlessly into the fabric of daily life. If this portrait of enduring private devotion speaks to you, consider reflecting on your own daily practices of faith or sharing this insight with someone seeking to see the divine in the ordinary. The next discovery awaits, ready to show how these personal acts of worship shaped communities, cultures, and perhaps the very foundations of a faith that continues to endure. As we turn from the ancient homes and the scrolls they preserve to our own lives, a striking truth emerges. Devotion is not measured by grandeur, by the visible acts that draw admiration, but by consistency, intimacy, and intention. The families who carefully copied and stored these scrolls centuries ago were not seeking recognition. Their worship was ordinary, yet profoundly transformative. In this, we find a reflection of our own spiritual journey, a reminder that the sacred often thrives in the unnoticed corners of our day. The question we face now is deceptively simple. How do we bring that same intentional devotion into our modern lives? Consider the rhythm of daily life. Mornings rushed, schedules crowded, screens clamoring for attention. In such a landscape, it is tempting to relegate spiritual practice to moments of crisis or ceremonial obligation. Yet the scrolls suggest another way, to embed faith into the ordinary. A blessing before meals, a short prayer upon waking, a verse recited quietly during a commute. These are not trivial acts. They are the contemporary echoes of families who lived in quiet conversation with God, who placed sacred text beside the mundane, and in doing so, transformed both. The scrolls also reveal the importance of intentional spaces. In ancient homes, a particular shelf, a hidden niche, a clay jar became a sanctuary within the household. Modern life may not provide floorboards to hide a scroll, but it offers opportunities to create sacred touchpoints. Perhaps it is a journal kept on a nightstand, a favorite passage bookmarked in a study Bible, or a corner of a room dedicated to reflection and prayer. These spaces, however small, become anchors, reminders that the divine is present not only in grand temples or public gatherings, but wherever attention and intention converge. What about the act of writing itself? Many scrolls bear the unmistakable marks of hands that copied, corrected, and preserved words across generations. There is power in the act of transcribing or journaling our prayers, reflections, and insights. Writing slows thought, clarifies intention, and imprints devotion onto the rhythm of our lives. Some modern spiritual advisors suggest keeping a daily scroll, not as a performance, but as a conversation, recording gratitude, lessons learned, petitions, and even doubts. Like those ancient families, we cultivate faith through repetition, reflection, and physical engagement with sacred words. The scrolls also demonstrate that worship thrives when it connects with the whole of life. They were placed near meals, hearths, and entrances, spaces that intersected with work, nourishment, and family interaction. Similarly, integrating faith into daily responsibilities transforms ordinary moments into acts of devotion. A patient word to a co-worker, a careful choice to respond with kindness, or mindful attention to a family member can become prayer in action. The sacred and the secular are not separate, they are intertwined. Every choice, every moment of intentionality can echo the quiet sanctity preserved in ancient parchment. We must also recognize the role of community. Even private devotion in ancient homes often intersected with broader networks of faith. Families shared passages, copied prayers, and communicated encouragement, creating a web of connection. Today, while our networks may be digital, the principle remains. Spiritual life flourishes when shared. Small groups, prayer partners, or even online communities provide encouragement and accountability. By participating in these networks, our private acts of devotion gain resonance, echoing the ancient practice of connecting individual households through faith. Yet, perhaps most profoundly, the scrolls remind us that consistency matters more than perfection. Smudges, corrections, patched parchment, these are not flaws. They are testimony to persistence. Likewise, in our own spiritual lives, occasional lapses, distractions, or missteps do not diminish the value of faithful practice. Faith is cumulative. Daily choices, repeated over time, create a rhythm that shapes character, molds conscience, and deepens awareness of God's presence. It is in the persistence, rather than the perfection, that transformation unfolds. Modern life often tempts us to seek instant gratification, visible results, or dramatic spiritual experiences. The scrolls, however, invite us to a quieter, more profound discipline, a steady, intentional, and private devotion that shapes us subtly but inexorably. This is not a call to austerity or ritualistic rigidity. It is a call to mindfulness, to integrating the sacred into the flow of everyday life. Every small act, repeated and remembered, becomes a thread in a larger tapestry of spiritual formation. So, what might this look like in practice? A morning reflection before starting the day, a mindful pause between meetings, a bedtime meditation on gratitude. These are the modern equivalents of the scrolls hidden beneath floors or stored in jars. Each act affirms the presence of the divine in the ordinary, sanctifies the mundane, and creates a rhythm of faith that sustains through challenges, joys, and uncertainties. Over time, these small, consistent actions accumulate into a spiritual life, both rich and resilient, echoing the enduring devotion of those ancient households. And here, as we consider the personal application of these insights, we encounter an invitation. If the story of these scrolls resonates with you, take a moment to reflect, to write, or to share this insight with someone else seeking to weave faith into their daily life. The practice of devotion is not confined to history. It is alive, waiting for the deliberate, persistent hands of those willing to cultivate it today. In this way, the ancient wisdom preserved in fragile parchment finds new life, speaking across centuries, reminding us that the sacred flourishes in ordinary hands and everyday moments. Even as we embrace the lessons of these ancient scrolls, a shadow emerges, the inner struggle that accompanies daily devotion. Faith, lived in private, is rarely easy. The families who preserved scripture in hidden jars and behind floorboards did so amid uncertainty, fear, and sometimes persecution. Their quiet persistence invites us to reflect on our own battles, moments of doubt, distraction, and spiritual fatigue that challenge our commitment to intentional worship. To understand the resilience of those who came before, we must confront the obstacles that confront us today. In the modern rhythm of life, distractions are relentless. Screens demand attention, tasks pile up, and noise competes with stillness. Even when we carve out time for prayer or meditation, our minds wander. The heart grows restless, and devotion can feel hollow or mechanical. Here, the ancient scrolls speak with a gentle authority. Persistence matters more than perfection. The faded ink, smudges, and repaired edges are evidence that devotion was maintained despite imperfections. Worship was never about flawless execution. It was about showing up day after day, heart and mind oriented toward the sacred. Yet there is more than distraction at play. Doubt creeps in quietly, often unrecognized until it has taken root. Questions about purpose, fairness, and the presence of God can unsettle the most faithful. Those ancient households may have experienced similar struggles: illness, loss, political unrest, and the ever-present uncertainty of survival. Yet the act of daily prayer, of keeping Scripture close, provided a tether, an anchor to a larger reality. For us, the challenge is similar. When the heart wavers, the ritual of consistent devotion can become a lifeline, a reminder that faith endures even when understanding falters. Resistance may also arise from within the self. Pride, impatience, and skepticism can distort intention. We may long for visible signs of spiritual progress or for affirmation from others, measuring devotion by its apparent results. But the scrolls remind us that the measure of faith is often invisible, recorded in quiet acts and unseen perseverance. True devotion does not seek recognition. It cultivates the soul through consistency and sincerity. Every small effort, though unseen by the world, is a stroke in the ongoing work of spiritual formation. Emotional struggle is another dimension. Ancient families placed prayers near hearths and doorways, not only for protection, but as an emotional anchor. Daily life, then as now, could be overwhelming. The scrolls reveal that worship was a coping mechanism, a source of comfort and hope in the face of uncertainty. Today, when anxiety, loss, or frustration threaten to dominate our hearts, the same principle applies. Intentional, ordinary acts of devotion, prayer, meditation, reflection, or journaling can provide the steadying force that prevents spiritual life from unraveling. But facing obstacles is not merely about endurance, it is also about insight. The scrolls teach that struggle can refine devotion, deepen understanding, and strengthen resilience. Each smudge, each correction, each hidden fragment signals that persistence shapes character. Similarly, modern spiritual challenges, though difficult, are opportunities to cultivate patience, humility, and awareness of God's presence in all circumstances. In fact, the very difficulties that tempt us to abandon consistent practice may be the very circumstances that teach us its necessity. In this inner battle, discipline becomes an ally. Setting intentional times for prayer or reflection, creating physical or mental spaces for focus, and embracing small rituals can counter the pull of distraction. Like the families who tucked scrolls under floorboards or in jars, we can create tangible reminders of devotion, objects, routines, or symbols that call our attention back to the sacred. These anchors help sustain practice through life's chaos, transforming the struggle into a rhythm of resilience rather than a source of despair. There is also the dimension of community support. Ancient households, while preserving private worship, often shared passages, prayers, or encouragement with neighbors and relatives. Modern faith similarly benefits from connection. Trusted friends, mentors, or spiritual groups provide accountability, encouragement, and insight. They remind us that we are not isolated in our struggle, that devotion flourishes not only in solitude, but within a network of shared faith. Engagement with others can revitalize waning commitment and offer perspective when doubt looms large. Ultimately, the obstacles we face are not signs of failure. They are the natural friction of a life committed to persistence. The scrolls, fragile yet enduring, demonstrate that resilience is built over time through repetition and intention. Just as these families maintained worship in difficult circumstances, we too can cultivate a steady, meaningful practice, even when internal and external pressures threaten to derail us. The challenge is to persist, to anchor our devotion in daily action, and to recognize that struggle is not the enemy of faith but its crucible. If this reflection on the trials of daily devotion resonates, take a moment to stay with the journey. Perhaps comment or share your own experiences with spiritual persistence. By acknowledging the obstacles, we honor the reality of faith, and in doing so, we prepare for the transformation that is quietly waiting just beyond the struggle, ready to illuminate our lives as it did for those who held their sacred scrolls close centuries ago. From the quiet endurance of struggle emerges a moment of clarity, a revelation that transforms ordinary perseverance into a vision of renewed faith. The ancient scrolls, once hidden beneath floorboards or stored in clay jars, were not merely artifacts. They were instruments of transformation. They remind us that devotion, when practiced consistently, cultivates insight, shapes character, and illuminates the unseen currents of grace in everyday life. It is here, at this intersection of persistence and reflection, that the ordinary becomes extraordinary and the mundane becomes sacred. Imagine the household once again, centuries ago. The family has faced illness, scarcity, and the uncertainty of political upheaval. Yet each morning the scroll is unrolled, prayers are spoken, and scripture is recited. Over time, the repetition brings a subtle transformation. Fear gives way to trust, anxiety to patience, despair to hope. The written word becomes a mirror, reflecting the family's resilience and teaching them to perceive God's presence in both triumph and trial. In much the same way, our consistent devotion shapes perception, allowing us to see the sacred woven into the fabric of ordinary days. Modern life offers a parallel. We may not hide scrolls beneath floorboards, But the disciplines we cultivate, journaling, prayer, meditation, acts of kindness, serve the same purpose. Each intentional act reinforces our awareness of God's presence, gradually transforming our perspective. Challenges that once seemed insurmountable begin to reveal hidden lessons. Relationships gain depth, decisions are informed by wisdom rather than impulse, and daily routines become conduits of grace. This is the vision of transformation that the scrolls suggest. Faith is not merely a momentary experience, but a steady, cumulative shaping of the heart. The scrolls also illuminate the power of vision in devotion. The passages chosen, the prayers repeated, and the notes added all point toward a long-term understanding of faith. They were not intended for immediate reward, but for cultivation over time. Similarly, our spiritual practice is strengthened by envisioning the long arc of growth, trusting that small, consistent actions will yield profound transformation. Like the families of ancient Judea, we are called to commit to faith as a journey, not a fleeting moment. The cumulative effect of daily worship, whether a morning reflection, an evening prayer, or a simple act of kindness, builds a spiritual architecture that sustains us in every season of life. Consider the social dimension as well. Some scrolls indicate shared readings, copied passages, and communal prayers. Transformation was not only personal, but relational. The devotion of one household rippled outward, touching neighbors and extended family. In contemporary terms, the impact of consistent spiritual practice radiates beyond the individual. Acts of quiet devotion influence those around us, creating a network of encouragement, hope, and moral guidance. The vision offered by the scrolls, therefore, is both inward and outward. Personal transformation catalyzes a broader spiritual renewal. Furthermore, the scrolls suggest that transformation is not always dramatic or visible. Much like the subtle changes in parchment, faded ink, careful corrections, added notes, spiritual growth is often incremental. Patience, discernment, and perseverance are cultivated gradually. Yet the effect is enduring. Small, faithful acts accumulate, creating a resilient spiritual foundation. Each prayer, each reflection, each intentional pause in the day contributes to a life increasingly aligned with divine purpose. The ordinary, repeated faithfully, becomes the conduit for extraordinary change. This vision also carries hope for those burdened by doubt or fear. Just as ancient families preserved sacred texts despite uncertainty, we are invited to trust in the slow, cumulative work of devotion. Transformation does not require perfection, nor does it demand dramatic signs. It asks only for persistence, attention, and openness to the subtle ways God works in our lives. As the scrolls teach, faith is a living, breathing rhythm, quiet, unassuming, yet powerful enough to shape generations. And in this vision, there is an invitation to recognize the sacred potential in the ordinary, to see daily routines as fertile ground for transformation. Each meal, each conversation, each moment of reflection can be infused with purpose and grace. The scrolls remind us that devotion is not an isolated act, but a sustained practice that transforms the self, the household, and the wider community. In embracing this vision, we participate in a spiritual legacy that has endured for centuries, echoing in homes, hearts, and lives across time. If this vision of transformation resonates with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need encouragement. Just as the ancient scrolls connected households across distances, your words or actions can extend the reach of faith, creating a ripple of insight, hope, and devotion. The journey from ordinary practice to extraordinary transformation is accessible to all who commit to persistence, mindfulness, and intentional worship, and it is a journey that can begin today. As we draw this journey to a close, the story of the ancient scrolls reminds us of a profound truth. The sacred is most potent when woven seamlessly into the ordinary. Across centuries, these humble fragments of parchment, hidden beneath floorboards, tucked into jars or preserved behind walls, bear witness to a devotion that was neither ostentatious nor public. Yet their power lies precisely in their quiet persistence, in the intimate faith of ordinary households that chose to honor God in every meal, every task, and every moment of reflection. It is a faith that speaks across time, inviting us to consider how we, too, cultivate the sacred within our own lives. We have seen how these scrolls reveal personal prayer, family rituals, and the transmission of belief from one generation to the next. They show that worship was not confined to grand temples or public ceremonies, but lived in the rhythms of daily life. Each crease in the parchment, each faded word, and each careful correction tells a story of resilience, love, and determination. Families faced uncertainty, adversity, and fear, yet still they chose to embed the divine into the fabric of the mundane. Their lives testify that devotion is not measured by spectacle, but by intention, consistency, and the courage to persist when no one else is watching. For us today, the scrolls offer a mirror and a guide. They challenge us to see our own routines, our own spaces, as potential vessels of worship. Morning coffee, bedtime reflection, the care of children, or the offering of kind words at work. These are not small, insignificant acts. They are opportunities to practice the sacred in tangible, consistent ways. The legacy of these households reminds us that faith is most deeply formed not in isolated moments of inspiration, but in sustained, ordinary acts of devotion that shape character, resilience, and perspective over time. Moreover, these artifacts reveal the relational dimension of faith. While devotion was practiced privately, many scrolls were shared, copied, or communicated between households, forming invisible networks of encouragement and solidarity. In our own lives, spiritual transformation is strengthened by connection. Friends, family, mentors, and communities of faith provide guidance, accountability, and inspiration. Just as the ancient scrolls linked households across distances, our acts of devotion can ripple outward, touching lives we may never fully see, creating a shared culture of hope, resilience, and reverence. Perhaps the most enduring lesson is the power of persistence. The imperfections on these scrolls, the smudges, corrections, and patches, speak to human struggle and resilience. Devotion was rarely perfect, but it was constant. The families who preserved these texts demonstrated that faith flourishes not in moments of perfection, but in repeated acts of dedication. Their example invites us to persist in our own spiritual practices, to return to prayer, reflection, or acts of kindness, even when it feels difficult, even when results are invisible. Each deliberate act is a stitch in a tapestry of transformation, both personal and communal. As we reflect on this legacy, we are called to a sacred choice, to see the ordinary as extraordinary, to recognize that everyday life can become a sanctuary when approached with intention. The scrolls are a reminder that faith is not a distant ideal, but a lived reality, shaped in small, repeated actions that honor God and cultivate inner resilience. They invite us to trust that over time, persistence in devotion yields clarity, insight, and transformation, just as it did for those ancient households who held these fragile texts close to their hearts. So, as this story reaches its close, consider the invitation it carries for you. Let your daily life be a vessel for the sacred. Let small, consistent acts of worship, reflection, and kindness shape your heart and the world around you. If the message of these scrolls has touched you, share it with someone who might also see the divine in the ordinary. Comment, reflect, or pass it on. Be part of this living legacy of devotion. The quiet faith of the past calls to us still, offering a path to live fully, intentionally, and with reverent persistence in every moment of our lives. The scrolls, though ancient and fragile, endure. And in their endurance, they teach us that devotion, ordinary, consistent, and heartfelt, can transform the ordinary into the sacred. the mundane into the eternal, and our lives into living testimonies of faith.